Okay, it says we are live. And I see a comment on LinkedIn from Ashley. So I'm guessing that we are live on LinkedIn and YouTube right now.
Oh,
Woohoo!
it's so success.
So, hi, Lauren. So this is our coffee chat. We're just chatting about how we got into data, what we do at our jobs. And I wanted to say thank you for coming onto this stream because I was realizing that I'm kind of used to being on camera, like with my TikToks, but even though you create content and some of the other guys create content, you're probably not used to being on camera for your content. So thank you for taking your time and coming here on camera with me.
No problem. It's definitely a learning experience, but I'm like super excited to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So I figured we'd just start. I kind of, at each of these coffee chats, have talks about my background, and I know that you heard it before. And also, I think you've been doing like a series on LinkedIn about like your journey into data, right?
Yeah, just
So,
recently.
I mean, in the like description of this video on YouTube, I'll like put the links to your series so people can see it. But, let's just like recap it. So we both were occupational therapists before getting into data, which is awesome. And this is my first time talking with a woman, which I also think is awesome because I feel like, I mean, you tell me what you think about this, but I felt like I just saw data initially as a field that like, oh, well, men, like I just saw it as like a male, which it is still a male dominated field if you look at the statistics. But I have been surprised getting in at one, like how many women there are, and two, how supportive all the women are. Like you tell a woman you're getting into data analytics, and they're like, let's go. Anything you want, you call me up and I'll help you. Have you felt that too?
I absolutely I have reached out to a couple of like the bigger content creators on LinkedIn and just like asked questions about like, oh, how did you do this or that? And like the fact that I know from my own experience, like I don't have a huge following, but like I get enough messages that I feel overwhelmed sometimes. So the fact that I like get a response at all, but like even within like a couple of hours, I'm like, you guys are so supportive and so excited to be like a part of other people's journeys. And like that's I don't know if that's like a woman empathy thing or if it's just like, hey, I want more women involved, but it is, I feel the same way.
It's just nice to see someone who looks like you doing it. Like the CEO at my company is a woman, and every time she like really gets into the technical details and like really just crushes it, I'm like, I love that. I love seeing myself represented up there in the CEO of this company. So yeah, so what I read most of your posts, but what inspired you? What was kind of the thing that made you feel like you were an occupational therapist, so what kind of was your first like, oh, maybe data is the answer?
So it's been 8 years in the making. I graduated like 8 years ago and kind of knew from the jump that OT was like maybe not it. And so tried a bunch of different things and it was almost always like tech related. So I did like UX at one point. I tried to look at that. I tried to look at like front end web development and like nothing ever stuck. And I always kind of just felt like I would come home from work and I'd be like, oh my gosh, like I am too tired for this. I can't get back on my computer. I can't keep doing this stuff. And I would just kind of like
Yeah.
stop. And then honestly, like the last, I guess it was last January, I was working in a school and I had some really great coworkers and I like slowly found out that almost all of them were leaving at the end of that school year. And I was like, well, you guys were what was keeping me here. So like, I really need to figure this out now. And I just I came across Charlotte Chase on TikTok and I like saw what she's talking about. And she's a data analyst who is actually, I think she's also in the Philadelphia area, which is where I'm from. And she was like
I
talking
think
about
she is.
she was talking about what she does, and like the earning potential and all of that stuff. And I was like, oh, this sounds really cool. Like, let me look into it. And for whatever reason, like I looked into it, I started taking courses and I was like, SQL's really cool and I really like it. And it's something I like felt like I could do. And it was something where I like came home from work and I was like, okay, like I'm ready to jump on the computer and keep doing this. And that kind of was like my big sign that this was something I could see myself doing more long term.
Yeah. I felt the same way. Like not necessarily that I didn't think that OT was for me, but definitely like I started learning data analytics thinking I'm going to do this as a side hustle, as a hobby. And then I was at my dream fieldwork setting. I'd gone to graduate school so I could work at a pediatric clinic, like kids and who had sensory processing disorder, because that's what I was so interested in. And I got placed there for my fieldwork, and I was there, and I really did love it. But I was so excited to come home at the end of the day and literally just select from where. That was it. That was it at that moment in time.
Yes.
I was so excited about that.
No, it's such a good feeling to be like, I was intent on finding out this particular thing in my data, and I did a couple of like simple queries, and here's my answer. Like, it's super cool to like have that success, and it's like immediate feedback, which is very nice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cool to feel like, oh, actually, I can do this. Like when you run your first like query that looks complicated and you see that it works, you're like, I wrote that.
Yes. Yes. And I was thinking about this because I've been trying to like, I wish I documented everything that I did and when I did it throughout my like learning, because I'm going back and I'm like, when did this thing happen again? And like,
Yeah.
it's so interesting because I've thought about the amount of times that I started from like select star from, and like at the time, even then I was like, oh, this is so cool. But then like I started doing joins and I started doing unions, and I'm like, okay, like this looks increasingly complex. And I like tried to explain it to my parents one time, and I showed them something, and they were like, what is this? It's like, that's what I like to hear. It looks,
I'm doing it.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So it seems like you, from when I was seeing in your post, it seems like you kind of took a while to like convince yourself this is what you wanted to do. Like it seemed like this was like it was a carefully thought out move for you. You didn't just jump in right away. So was there like a turning point, or was it just kind of this gradual avalanche of yes, I like this. Yes, I can do this.
I think it was more like partially right time, right place. Like I said, I was like not ready to be at the school that I was at without any of my support network there. But it really was like I continued to learn, and everything that I was learning, I was like, I really like SQL. Great. I really like Tableau. Awesome. Um, and I think I kind of just kept waiting for that point in time where I was going to be like, oh, like maybe not. This is not for me. Like, let me try the next thing. And that point just never came. So it was like kind of a weird combination of the two. Like, I just kind of kept slowly picking it up, but at the same time, I was very much like, I need to make a move. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people who have like ADHD, whatever, they're neurodivergent. I definitely have a neurodivergent brain, and a lot of us seem to run on like these 3 month cycles of like we get really into a hobby for 3 months and then we either leave it behind entirely or just kind of put it on the shelf. So that was my benchmark of like, okay, I need to enjoy doing this consistently for more than 3 months. Like if I still like it after 3 months, then I'll make a life change. But I'm not going to make a life change before then because like I was really into photography a year and a half ago. But if it was my career, I'd be pretty unhappy right now.
So I have a question then, because I know like from your posts on TikTok, which I think I also started seeing fairly early on, like, did you just think like, oh, this will be like a fun thing to document along the way? And like, if in 3 months I lose interest, like, oh, well, or was that like, how did that even get started? Because I feel like when I first got started in learning, there was no part of my brain that was like, I should document this journey somewhere.
Yeah, I think what the initial thought was that I figured I could do it as a side hustle, and I'd seen a lot of TikToks about side hustles, and I was like, I bet you if I could learn how to work with spreadsheets well enough that people would hire me to work on their spreadsheets for them, and I could get paid like just a side hustle amount of money for that, people would want to know that. And I, at the time, was like, I have the luxury of like I don't have kids, I don't have pets, I have cacti, but that's it for plants. So I don't have a lot of responsibilities in my life. So I had the luxury of having this free time to go and devote myself to this. Whereas I talk to a lot of other people who are moms and single moms, and they've got really demanding pets or whatever, and they don't have that time. So I figured I could spend the time documenting whether or not it worked as like an experiment. And then if it did work for me, then other people would have this like model to follow. So that was the only reason really why I started documenting it. But now looking back, I am so glad that I did for so many reasons. And I think that anybody who's thinking about who's starting to learn data analytics, should find some way, a journal, a blog, doesn't have to be a TikTok, whatever, to document it, because being able to look back for yourself, but also when you go to get jobs, I think it's really helpful to like have that documented. So,
For sure.
how far into your learning process did you start thinking you were going to apply to jobs?
I was one of those people that like I kept feeling like I needed to take more and more and more courses to get to the point where I was ready to apply to jobs. And I'm trying to think, I know I started applying back in July, and I want to say, I can't even think of like what made me finally be like, okay, I'm really going to pull this trigger. Like I'm gonna do it, gonna like actually start applying places. And again, like I kind of hate to say it, but I think so much of it was like July was the end of my school year, and I learned that my boss was leaving, and I learned that my really close friend was really definitely leaving. And like, it kind of got to the point where like, it was either I need to start applying to jobs or I like need to accept that this is going to be like a whole new ball game anyway. So I don't know really. I truly like, I wish I had documented better to be like, this is even the first job that I applied to, because I don't even think I know that at this point. Like I did not do a great job in the beginning of like putting down these are the places that I applied to. I tried for a short time to like do a spreadsheet and mark off like, did I where I applied, when I applied, like did I reach out to somebody at the company? And like honestly that kind of fell by the wayside at some point. So yeah, I get like that, even that process of things, I've had to go back in my emails and be like, let me look back and see exactly when I did these things and like how I did it, because I feel like it was such a blur over 2 or 3 months of like ferociously applying places and constantly getting those like, sorry, you don't have what we're looking for kind of
Yeah.
emails. So maybe
Yeah.
like trauma, just like I tried to like put it
Yeah.
out of my
Yeah. I felt the same way. Do you think that there was anything in your learning journey up to the point until when you started applying that was maybe not the best use of your time? Like, did you do extra certificates? Like, or was it all really, you think, worth your time?
No, so that is definitely one of the things that I like looking back on it. I did way more courses than I needed to. I did Google's data analytics certificate. I did Charlotte Chase's Break into Tech certificate. I did a couple of Udemy courses on like Tableau and SQL. And again, like I started so many of them from Select Star from Table. Like so many of them were such like, they started at the very, very beginning every single time. And in a way like that really hammered home like the concepts of this is exactly what we're doing. But at the same time, like had I spent that time looking for data sets and building projects of my own, or even like doing like follow alongs like Alex the Analyst projects, I
On
think that
YouTube,
would
yeah.
have been a much more like beneficial use of time, and I would have had something to show for it besides just like, yeah, I completed this certificate program. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, sure, but like what does that, like
What
what
does
does
that
that,
mean?
yeah, like you're not showing me that you have the skills still.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I do
So
think
when you started applying to jobs can be a little bit like, okay, it can be a little bit like screaming into a void and not getting any response. But also, it can be a little bit like a mirror because it mirrors back to you kind of where your weak points are and where your strong points are. So did you feel like there were certain things like after doing all those courses, what was reflected back at you as like things you needed to work on in order to get a job or areas that you were like, oh, I'm good?
I think that it was really just like being able to, the biggest thing that I needed to work on is being able to talk about the skills. I like, cause like I said, you can see on my resume that I've done X, Y, and Z certificates, but like I would get into like screening calls or interviews and they would be like, so like, tell me about a time that you worked with like a large amount of data. And I'd be like, uh, what? Like kind of one of those. Um, so like really getting to know, I think one of the biggest turning points for me was doing like Maven Analytics they have like their monthly challenges, and they provide not only like a data set, but they also provide like relevant questions that you might want to answer. And it was a really good starting point for me to like dive deeply into one data set, really get to know it. And then like the next time I had that question of like, tell me about a time you worked with data, I was like, oh, well, let me tell you about this project that I did. And I was able to like very, very clearly say like, this is what I did. This is why I did it. Here are my outcomes. Like, so being able to like talk about the data was ironically like the one thing that I really didn't have the ability to do at the beginning, that I like very quickly found out was something that I really needed to have.
We can hear your dogs in the background, in case anyone's wondering what that sound is. um, yeah, that's really cool that you said that, actually, because Chris and I talked about that last week, and then Ian and I basically talked about that kind of with being able to doing the projects, whether or not an employer goes and looks at your projects. The fact that you have the ability to talk on them speaks volumes to your ability to actually use the tools. And if you, somebody I think said they were kind of worried about documenting their journey because they don't want to put it publicly, they're afraid of failure. One, the community is really great, and nobody is here to judge you. But two, you could just do it in a blog that like just you are going to see or whatever, because when you start writing about, here's what I did, here's the challenges that I faced, this was my first time using a huge data set, here's what I thought about it. Now you've at least put that into words, text words, if you're not making videos about it. So that, like you said, when someone asks you in an interview, you don't have like, you couldn't tell me what you think about this, but in an interview, I don't have a lot of extra brain space to come up with new content. It's kind of what's in there is in there. Do you agree with that?
I did the thing where like I literally Googled common interview questions, and I had written down in front of me, like during almost all of my interviews, like, if this question is asked, like, here's a story you can tell about it. Like, so no, I definitely like, I needed to have it all already in my brain because I could not come up with answers on the spot.
Yeah. Yeah. So practicing a little bit, talking about it means you have that content kind of already filled into your head. I think I saw someone ask a question that I didn't want to move. Oh yeah, here it is. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Mentioned follow-alongs. Did you find them on YouTube or where? Yeah, so definitely. One of the biggest content creators that does follow-alongs is Alex the Analyst on YouTube. He's super involved on YouTube and LinkedIn, and he does, correct me if I'm wrong, I know he does Tableau like project follow-alongs, but I also think he may have some on like Power BI or Python and some other
I think I saw one for Python, yeah.
Yeah, and his are great because it's like, again, I know the one that I did was like he got data from Airbnb for a specific city, and then he went through and he was like, you know, we can look at number of nights that people stayed on average, or like the expense in like different parts of the city and stuff like that, which was great. And I was able to like follow along and recreate that. But then I was also able to go to Airbnb data myself and pick a different city and do something very similar and kind of like reinforce that like learning, but on my own time and with a slightly different data set.
Yeah.
So his are
definitely
definitely one of the big ones. I don't know if you know of other follow along projects though.
I don't know. I don't actually use YouTube really, but I would say that the Maven courses, they're the way that I know you're taking them, the way that they're structured is awesome, because it's not a follow along. Like well, some of it is follow along actually. Like the lesson is follow along, and then they say, okay, now you go do it. But then they have a video that shows you how to do it step by step if you get stuck. So that's another option. So I don't want to I don't want to leave this point of feeling ready, because I think that a lot of people say that they don't feel ready enough to post portfolios or to go and apply for jobs. How long into applying to jobs did you actually feel ready to apply to jobs?
Never. Is that an answer?
Yeah.
No, I really I applied very heavily in like July and August. And I was lucky enough that one of the first places that I like applied and interviewed with was where I ended up working. But like even now, like again, something else I was really recently thinking about is like this idea of imposter syndrome, and like kind of looking around and being like, how did I get here? And I actually just asked my manager last week, like, why did I get this job and how? And he basically said it's because I interviewed well. So it doesn't answer the question of like how I got to that point, like what things my resume showed or what my cover letter showed, but at least I know that like interviewing skills was like one of my strengths, I guess. But honestly, like even then, I didn't feel like I was ready to apply. Like I really, 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 had I had my choice, I would have kept doing course after course after course, because it feels like I'm doing something, even though it's not actually getting me anywhere.
Yeah, I definitely didn't. I mean, honestly, if you threw me back into the job market right now, I'm still not even sure I would feel
Yeah.
ready, because it's such a moving target, and all the job descriptions, you look at them and they say they want 2 years of experience, they want you to have all these things, and it's like, when did I have to start learning this when I was a baby? You know, like when would I have gained all this experience?
Yes. And it's like, it's the same thing where, you know, people are like, oh, well, if you like hit a certain number of criteria on the job posting, like apply anyway. They're not asking, like, they don't actually want everything they're asking for. And it's like, but like that in the moment, that doesn't really help. Like, I'm still looking at this
Hmm.
job posting, being totally overwhelmed by the number of skills or like the types of skills that they are asking for. So, like, yeah,
Yeah.
even now, I could get back into the job market and I would be like, oh shoot, like, whoops.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the thing too. Like we a lot of people will say, if you see like kind of not analytics, if you look at managers and stuff on LinkedIn, they'll say, I'm really looking for people who can be critical thinkers and can ask the right questions and stuff. But like you said, like you look at that in the moment, it doesn't feel like that. When you see that, it doesn't feel like that. It just feels like you have this insurmountable list. And at some point, like they do have to make a decision on going one way or the other. And
Mhm.
so I feel like for some jobs, when I got a recruiter screening call, they asked me, "Do you have experience with SQL?" And I told them what I had with the projects, but then that was it. And I didn't hear back from them. And I was like, okay, I'm just not a match for what they're looking for. But the ones that I moved further on were the ones that it was my like communication skills and stuff that I felt like we had a really good conversation. They were interested in what I had to say, that they liked the way that I thought through things. And that seemed to be the common thread of when I got moved through to the next interview. What was your thing? Like, what do you think felt like moved you on to the next interview?
Um, so this was like, again, my application process was like very overall, I would say like it was fairly short. The place like I applied to a bunch of places and I either didn't hear back or I got a no from the vast majority of them. But I got interviews at two places essentially. And for Oscar Health, which is where I am currently working, their interview process was literally like screening call, basically just to say like, hey, tell me about your background. And like that was such a basic phone call. It was like 15 minutes and it was really nothing. And then she was like, okay, well, so next steps are like, I'm going to set up 4 30-minute interviews. They were all one-to-ones. They were all like, they were within a couple of days of each other. And that was it. Like it was screening call, those 4 interviews. And then the job offer came a couple of weeks later. So like, I think behavioral questions I did fairly well on, but like besides that, it was a very straightforward process. And I feel like so many job applications you hear is like, you know, you have the screening call, you have 6 one-on-one interviews, and then you have a take-home assessment, and then you have another 6 interviews. And it's like, that was not my experience, which was probably a good thing for me. But yeah, it was like
Yeah.
fairly straightforward.
Yeah, that's interesting. So did you encounter some of those like stock behavioral questions, like tell me about a time that you messed up at work and how did you handle it?
Yes, absolutely. And it was like, it was like, I think one of the ones that I got that was like word for word pulled from a website was like, tell me about a challenging situation you've dealt with at work. And like, anybody can find a challenging situation and like kind of explain in a way how they solved those problems. And I do think like those questions are of use because it does kind of show like your problem solving skills to some extent. But at the same time, like, because I had prepared for that kind of question, I had an answer right away. And I had a way of presenting my story and my answer in a way that was like way more problem solving than it really was in real time. So like, it was definitely, those behavioral questions were like, they were very much the typical kinds that like I had searched and found answers for basically. Otherwise,
yeah, well, if you have the opportunity to practice that's content that's already in your brain, I guess.
Exactly. Like I needed to have that because like if somebody asked, if I had like not prepared at all for that kind of thing and somebody's like, tell me about a challenging situation, I would have been like, let me think about that for a while, because it like, even if it's a fairly basic and like straightforward question, I think it does take brain power and effort to like think of the way to frame it and like exactly what you want to say and how you want to say it. So that kind of stuff was very beneficial in terms of getting ready to apply.
Yeah. So when did you get your job? When did you start?
I started mid-September.
Okay. So September, October, November, December. So that's 3.5 months. So you've been settled in long enough. Like, so what are the general things? So I guess a good question is, what's your title? What's your job title?
So I am a data/business intelligence analyst on the service operations data team.
Okay.
So like the vast majority of what I do is my team works on like a sprint cycle. So every 2 weeks we get together as a team, and throughout those past 2 weeks, internal stakeholders at our company will have submitted projects to us, and then we'll assign those projects out. And for the next 2 weeks, basically, like we are responsible for completing whatever projects we've been assigned. Typically, like that for me is a lot of SQL. It's a lot of like straightforward data pulls. And then building data visualizations those are like my two big things that I'm currently doing. There's definitely like Python involved in some of the jobs that I cannot do because I don't know Python. But yeah, it's mostly for me, it's mostly like SQL and data visualization. And then like we have a lot of like internal systems at my company that don't make sense to people outside of the company. So it's like not even worth explaining. But for the majority of my job, I would say like we use BigQuery, which I have become a huge fan of. And that's kind of like where I live.
Yeah. So I actually have not really used heavy SQL for a job. So I'm curious, when you're using SQL, are you doing anything like really complicated? Like I know that like Megan and Jess on LinkedIn post some like really complicated, like really cool functions and stuff. Are you doing like really complicated, like crazy joins and window functions, or what's
Yeah.
kind of the standard day?
So for the most part, I would say like it's way more complex than I like expected it to be. This like not this early on, but like it is more complex SQL. I use a lot of like coalesce functions to deal with like when there's null values in our data, which happens a ton. I use window functions at times, but I still definitely like, I need my team leader to be like, okay, this is how we're going to do this. And I like just recently started using them by myself, and I'm still like working on those skills. I did like, I'm trying to think when it was, a couple of months ago, we had been working on a specific problem where it was like we wanted to see, like, for instance, I work in claims and like claims data. So I work with a lot of health insurance claims, and we wanted to see like the amount of money that we were paying out per state, for instance. So we wanted to see that. And then they also wanted to see like the total amount of money that we're paying out overall. And so I found a really cool function. It's called roll up, and you can like use it to basically break it down. So we had state amount, and at the very bottom it was like total and then total amount using roll up, which like I just Googled until I found something that worked in the way I wanted it to work. But it was cool because it was one of those times where like I came in and my team leader was like, I haven't had anybody show me a new function in a while, and this was a new function. And I was like, yes, like win for me.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. So you'd say you're doing polling and a bit of analyzing, like, so it's not just like I'm just selecting this so I can export a Excel file for someone else to analyze. You're doing a bit of analyzing in your SQL functions as well?
Yeah, I would say like a lot of it is, especially like where I'm at, a lot of it is just like straight data pulls. But part of it is also analyzing. I want to say that like the vast majority of my job is like probably more on the lines of like pulling things. It's just like slightly more complicated data than I was expecting. So it's like that in itself has been a huge learning curve.
Yeah. Yeah, I have had a couple projects recently where I started the project and I was like, I'm not going to call it imposter syndrome, but I am feeling something right now, and it is not positive. I do not know if I could. Fortunately, my boss is like super helpful, so I was able to talk to him. But I had this one project where I had to work with Salesforce for the first time, and if anybody has ever encountered Salesforce, it's like really terrible. And there was like just a lot of fields that had weird names, and I didn't know how. And so I spent like a long time just data finding, and so I probably spent about 2 weeks having a conversation with myself that like I was like, you don't know what you're doing for like 2 weeks. I was like, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. You still don't know what you're doing. And it it was it was hard to like build myself back up and say like, it's okay. You don't need to know what you're doing. Like you're doing a good job. Have you felt that with your job at all?
Constantly. I
Okay.
definitely, and I also like my company it's a startup health insurance company. And so like, I think at the beginning we weren't necessarily like, they didn't know where we were going. So they didn't plan super far ahead for some of the stuff. So like I've seen a lot of the same like naming conventions are really, really tough sometimes. And half of my day is spent finding out like, what does field XYZ247 mean? Like, could we not have
Hmm.
just called it first name? Or like what like
Yeah.
things like that
Yeah.
that are just like,
Quantity.
yes, could we not have just like maybe made this a little bit clearer for future us to use? Because right now, like it takes up so much of my time just figuring out what our data means and like how it all interacts with each other. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I saw
definitely.
a good question like kind of related to this in chat. It says, what's harder, the technical challenges or translating business requirements? I'm curious of your answer for this one. Do you think that you have to do a lot of critical thinking about the business requirements and like asking the right questions? Like, is that a hard part of your job, or are you doing a lot more like just technical stuff?
Um, I definitely do both. I think like at the very beginning, it was definitely like more technical stuff and learning the data. And as I've kind of moved forward in the job, like I am expected a lot more to like reach out to stakeholders and ask the right questions. And that in itself is like, I almost think that that's where the imposter syndrome comes in for me even more is like, I have a teammate and I will typically send him like before I like Slack over a message to our stakeholder, I'll send it to him and be like, does this message make sense? Does it sound like it's the way it's meant to be sounding? Would you add anything? Would you change anything? Like, is there anything I'm missing here? So I feel like that part for me is almost harder. And maybe that's partially because like with the technical stuff, I can go to my team leader and be like, hey, I haven't encountered this before and I need help. But with the like business requirement side of things, I almost feel like this is something that I should just be able to figure out and ask on my own. And that's not always the case.
Yeah. Do you think that if you were to like if each time that happened, you were to be talking to your team leader about it, like obviously you wouldn't do that, but what do you think their opinion would be on it? Like would they kind of expect you to be able to do that or no?
Um, I think that at this point in time, like they would at least start to expect me to be able to be doing it. I know there are still things that I have yet to encounter, in terms of just like projects and like tools that I haven't had to use yet. And at that point, like it's fair game to go to him and be like, hey, haven't been exposed to this. Like, I don't even know what this person's asking for. But I feel like if I continued to do that, it would kind of get to the point where it's like, you need to, like, part of the reason that I was hired was for those critical thinking skills and problem solving skills. And like, that means not going to my leader every single time I have a question, like kind of trying to figure it out a little bit on my own, and then maybe using some like team support if I need it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that my job, a lot, like definitely a lot of it is the business requirements, not for my business, but my job is that other businesses will bring their data to us. And what is unique about it is that usually if they're bringing their data to us, it means that they've never had reporting on their data before, and I'm the first person to build it, or they're at a big transition period and everything is really messy. Um, and so most people come in either without an idea of what they want or with an idea of what they want, and then they are definitely going to change their minds after because it's not actually what they want. And so what I'm finding is a big challenge that's really just developing as I go along is being able to in initial meetings gather what it is that they want and need, and then hear what they're saying, and then output what they actually want and need to cut out the middle steps of having to rebuild a dashboard multiple times. Because if they buy a 60-hour bucket and then I spend 20 hours on a dashboard and they say, no, actually, I think that we should do it like something entirely different, then that's another 20 hours. And then we're getting towards the end of the 60 hours and I haven't even delivered the product, which I'm not expected to necessarily, but it's still stressful. Um, yeah, so that kind of figuring out what are the right questions to ask myself and the data and the stakeholders is really hard. Someone had asked about learning and growth, though, which I think goes really well with this. They said, how much room for learning and growth did your first data analyst position give you? Was there someone who is or did mentor you? So I'm in my first data analyst position, and you are. My boss is an amazing mentor. I think that not everybody gets this. I've talked to people who only check in with their boss like once a week, once every other week, but my boss has office hours every day. And I often end up talking to him more times than that. And so he's been really supportive because they've really expected us to go from a very entry level place with our Tableau skills to much higher than that because every project is so different. And because of that, he's pretty available to us, and he has been an amazing mentor. And I feel like my skills have grown so much. Like the person that I was and the analyst that I was when I started my job is like just so different. It hasn't even been a full 6 months. And so I have gotten a lot of mentorship at my job. And it sounds like you've gotten a little bit. What's your take on this question?
Yeah, I would say that like my mentor is my team leader. Like our team is broken down a little bit differently. So we have like an overarching data team. And then within that team, we have smaller groups of people who work on specific parts of our data. So my team leader in my like small group has been phenomenal. He's like very supportive, very available, and like almost always has the answer, which is crazy because he has only been doing this for 2 years.
Yeah.
So like it's crazy how much he's picked up and learned as fast as he has. And then like our manager is also available if I need him, but most often like it's so easy just to go to my team leader. And I definitely like we have weekly check-ins. But other than that, like I speak to him multiple times a day. If I like need time, I put time on his calendar and he's like, okay, I'll be there. So that part has been like very, very useful. And I will say, coming from an occupational therapy background, like that was one thing that I really wish I would have searched for in my first job as an OT. I didn't have that like mentorship, and I feel like that really stunted my growth and probably led to some of my like dissatisfaction with that job in general. So like finding a mentor and finding that kind of like support was one of my top things. It was like of utmost importance.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting thing about coming from OT and now be in this field because it's so different. I know we saw a bunch of people who are like OTs and nurses and stuff in the chat. So what has been like the biggest things that have stuck out to you of like Wow, I really can't even believe how different this career is than my last one.
Um, I think so much of it. So a couple of big things that I like really have focused on that I appreciate so much more about this career in particular. I feel like for me, especially, I was working in a school and I would see students for literal years at a time. Like I started with one student when he was in first grade, and I still had him on my caseload when he was in fifth grade. And we were still working on similar things. So like so much of the time, it just kind of felt like I was spinning my wheels, and I would see a student for 30 minutes to 45 minutes at a time, one time a week. And like, that was it. And I was making no progress. And I think one of the really cool things about data is like, it really is. Every 2 weeks, I get a brand new set of projects and I get to do something new and I get to make progress and I get to submit projects and be like, okay, check, done. This is off my list. Like I can move on. That's one of the big ones that I like really, really appreciate about this. But like, it's so funny because I see so many of the soft skills of OT that I can use in data. And then I think about it and I'm like, they are still such vastly different careers that it's so interesting that like so many of the soft skills still apply to what I'm doing now.
Your dog shaking out over there. Yeah, I feel the same way. I've definitely had clients where I realized that what we were saying, they were not getting. And it wasn't that it was a literacy thing, but it was just that they had different learning needs than we did. And so because of what I learned in working with clients and working with kids as like an educator and stuff was I was able to take the way that I was presenting it and present it in a different way to different learning styles and different learning needs and convey to my team and anyone working with them that that's this change that we should make and see these really positive results. And I was like, wow, I definitely wouldn't have known any of that if I had not had all that kind of clinical and education background. That was a very like noble answer. I was thinking more along the lines of like I'm now work from home and I work in my own space and I can use the kitchen all day. Like I was thinking along those lines of how crazy it is that I used to drive a half hour to work every day through traffic, burn all that gas money, and now I just wake up and come over here.
And I will say like, I think I just recently had a post about this and like, I don't want to like, OT is a great profession for a lot of people and a lot of people love it. And it was not for me, but like thinking back on, so there's so many things like for my job, I will have like a week or two delay on something that I was supposed to get done. And I'll like Slack the person. I'll be like, hey, I'm so sorry. Like this happened and this happened. And they're like, oh, no problem. Like, I know you're so busy, no issue. Like get to it when you can. And I feel like in healthcare professions in general, like there's a lack of respect and a lack of like boundaries for people that like that also has been a huge change for me is like I feel more respected in what I'm doing now. But like generally work-life balance has improved significantly. Like I'm definitely working later hours now. But I also go and I take my dogs for a walk in the middle of the day and I take them again at, towards the end of my work day. And like, I can go to the kitchen and make coffee and do all of those things. Like that has been an enormous change that has like been huge for me.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely space things out. Like I was just talking to my boss about this today. I kind of just have a list of things that I'd like to do today, and they don't have a specific order. And so, like, if I feel like going to the gym in the morning, I will, and then I'll end up working until 8 p.m. If I need to go to the grocery store during the day because I know that there's going to be bad weather later, I will. And so it's more of like these are things I need to do today rather than an in order list of these are the things that I need to do today, which I feel works a lot better with my nervous system, being able to do an interest based to do list rather than an importance based to do list.
I totally agree. And I like will do something very similar. Like I have certain times of the day where like I kind of have to leave, otherwise dogs will start rebelling. But other than that, I'm like, all right, I'm going to work on this project until I get to a blocking point, and then I'm going to walk away and I'm going to do this, and then I'll come back and try again. Like it's very much like laying my day out in a way that works best for me, which is like, I think back to last school year when I was waking up at 4:30 every morning to exercise before going to work. And then I would get home and like I was in bed by 8 and always wondered why I was so tired. And like my entire day time schedule has shifted around. And I'm like, oh, maybe it's because I was not doing what was right for my body. And now I kind of feel like I am.
Yeah, you get to listen to it. I also think it was interesting how you talked about how you feel more respected in the same kind of sentence that you said that you have better work-life balance, because I think that those are really connected, because I think back to the teachers that I worked with and the occupational therapists that I worked with and, everyone else in conjunction. And so many of them were so overworked and so burned out that they didn't have the respect, because it was almost like this protective mechanism. Like, I know that I have more things to do today than I could even possibly do. And so I literally do not have any time for anything that you have to say. And that was the vibe that I got even when I was in preschools, when it was just their job to be with the kids. I remember I was at a preschool once, and a lot of the teachers really yelled at kids, and that really bothered me because that's absolutely not how kids learn or how you should talk to kids. But it was because they really just didn't have much support. There was 25-year-olds. There was two of them. They didn't really get very good breaks, and so I think that this respect that we are both feeling coming into this field is partially because I think it's just a totally different field, but also because I think that having like work-life balance and like boundaries in your own job allows you to like give that to other people, whereas it's when it's taken from you, it's very hard. You have to pull a lot out of yourself to give that to other people. Have you felt like that
You're,
at all?
yes, you're completely right. And I also like, I do think in general, it's so hard. It like working with kids in particular and working in like healthcare settings too, like you're giving so much of yourself that at some point, like it just kind of makes it to the point where like you just don't have the space to respect others, to respect boundaries. And like at some point you're just trying to get all of your stuff done, and that bleeds over into every other part of life. And that's like not what I'm finding in this particular setting, in this like job in general. So yeah, I think it's definitely like a big part of it is kind of expectations that are being put on the people around you, and kind of like how everybody is being treated as a whole, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So what do you think is kind of it's so funny because when you are trying to get a new job, people will introduce to say, where do you see yourself in 1 year, in 5 years? And you're like, I don't know. It depends on if you freaking hire me or not. But now you've had a little bit of time to settle into it. Like, you seem to like data analytics and just kind of being in the tech space in general. So do you have thoughts on like the direction you're going to go, or are you just going to keep doing what you're doing? Like, what's your, you know, future? Do you have any
Yeah.
plans?
So I definitely do have plans. I unexpectedly, I am actually leaving my current job in 2 days. So I've been at Oscar for about
Really?
3.5 months, and in the same time period, I had started doing a little bit of outside work with Maven Analytics. I was kind of their SQL question and answer person. And that like relationship has grown over the last, I don't know, 2 months. And so I was offered a full-time position at Maven to start in January. So I am actually like, it's so weird to be saying and thinking about, because it's like, who leaves their first job after 3 months? And it is me. I do that apparently. So I'll still be doing some data analytics at Maven, but I will also be working with some of their like their business contracts and kind of like helping people form their own learning paths, which is super cool because that's like a huge part of what I've found that I enjoy doing.
Yeah.
It's really funny because one of my favorite things to do when I was like learning more SQL was like, if somebody else had questions, I was like, I can answer that. Like, let me explain to you how this worked and why it worked that way. And, I'll be that person for you. So I'm super excited that I can do that more.
I'm just showing some of the people congratulating you. That's super cool. I'm so excited to hear that. I really love, for anyone who doesn't know, Maven Analytics is a course platform. I personally, I did the Google Data Analytics certificate basically by accident. But Maven was the platform that when I picked one intentionally, that's the one that I picked. I send people there all the time. I love their courses. So that's super cool. And I know they've got a lot of dudes on staff. So like bringing a girl onto the team, like that's so exciting to hear. That's really
I
cool. And that's that's going to be fully remote too.
That will be fully remote. And I will say they're also based in Boston, which is kind of nice. Like my current team is based mostly in Phoenix. So being on the same time zone as others will be a nice change for me. But yeah, no, I'm like super, super excited to do it. And I get to do more content creation. And it's just like, I don't know, I'm very, very excited to get started.
I can hardly keep up with all these people congratulating you. Okay, there it says there's 6 people here watching the stream, but there's way more than that just commented on this. So people are really excited for you. That's really cool.
I appreciate everybody. I'm like super, and this is like the first like big time I've said it. I'm gonna say something on LinkedIn later this week, but like my job obviously knows that I'm leaving, so I'm excited to kind of start sharing.
I think that your dogs are stressed because you kept saying walk earlier.
I swear it's only the one who only makes noise when I am on any kind of phone call or like anywhere where
Wants
he
to
can
be
be
involved.
Yes, he chooses to be.
Yeah, so that's really cool. So you're still going to be doing, I love that you're kind of marrying this like occupational therapy for people who don't know, because I know a lot of people don't know. It's kind of like physical therapy, but it's also kind of like teaching, and it's also kind of like psychology. But a big thing you do a lot is teaching people how to do things, and you learn about that a lot in your studies. I, by the way, while we're making announcements, passed my boards exam for occupational therapy, which if you're a therapist, you know that's a big deal. If not, I'm letting you know it's a big deal. So I just passed my boards exam, and a lot of the content was about like teaching and stuff. So I think it's super cool that you get to bring everything you learned about teaching people with different learning styles and bring it into teaching people SQL. Like it's super cool that you get to kind of take the things. What is that? Do you know the word? I think it's like ikigai or something. Do you know it? The Japanese word?
I don't think I feel like I've heard it, but I don't know off the top of my head.
There's some word, and I can post it in the description later, but it's like this intersection between doing what you love, doing what's valuable to society, doing what you can get paid for, and something else. And then that is right in the middle. And I feel like you've found that with this
Yeah.
new transition. And you're coming to a startup. Startups are definitely coming out of like the teaching kind of more corporate healthcare world and into a startup is like it's a big transition. But how do you feel about
It's
coming into a startup?
I'm super excited. I am like very much a fan of like being involved in just like knowing what's going on in where I'm working. So I'm really excited to be a big part of like that journey. And I feel like Maven is still young enough that I can kind of like have help shape where it moves in the future, which is like super, super exciting for me. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to be a very good fit. For like exactly kind of what she said, like it is marrying exactly what I like to do and what I think I'm good at. So I'm really, really excited that it's like an opportunity that I have gotten a chance to have. And I think it's like so cool that we all talk about LinkedIn and networking and all that stuff so much. And that's exactly how this came about. Like it wouldn't have been an option for me if I hadn't been involved in networking. And if I hadn't like one of the things that the guy said when I was originally applying for like the TA position or like answering SQL questions was like, when my application came through, like they recognized my name because I had commented on their stuff and I had tagged them and stuff. And like, it's so cool to see all of that like advice that we all give to other people being put into action and like actually having a huge payout.
Yeah. Yeah. So for anybody who missed that, you were posting on LinkedIn and you said you were doing the challenges and stuff, right? So when you
Mm-hmm.
applied for the job at Maven Analytics, the job came up and then you applied for it and they're like, oh, like we know her, we've seen her name. That's what happened. They had seen your name on LinkedIn.
Yeah, they had seen my name. Like I posted a couple of articles about leaving healthcare with another healthcare professional who was leaving for data analytics back in like July and August. And John Poller, who is their, I want to say CFO, but I can't remember. He's like one of the main guys at Maven. He had actually messaged me on LinkedIn and he like gave me some really, really great insights and like it was so cool to have that like connection of somebody like intentionally reaching out to be like, hey, I love what you're doing. Here's some other people who can help you. Here are some resources that you can have. And like, so we had exchanged a couple of messages on LinkedIn. And then every time I like talked about my learning, or I said like, this is what I'm doing, like Maven was already always like one of the big things that was up there in terms of just like saying, like trying to get their name out and saying like, I really believe in what they're doing. So yeah, they definitely like through all of that knew me and knew my name and kind of was like, they were like, oh, we recognize this person, like, let's have a conversation.
Yeah. So back to the kind of looking forward thing, do you think that you'd like to keep going down like technical or, kind of like job responsibilities, or would you be interested in moving into management? Are there any other fields you'd like be interested in expanding to? Kind of
Um,
those future things.
I don't want to like limit myself by any means. I do like, I'm kind of open for whatever. I never expected. So that's part of my position at Maven is going to be like an account executive, which is like fully not data analysis. And I never
Mm-hmm.
expected that to be the thing that like that I was going to be doing at, 3 months after getting my first data job. So I don't ever want to say like I'm not interested in something. I do know that ed tech is kind of always one of the fields that I've been really interested in. Like I did work in education for 5 years. So I do like that side of things. And I do like the idea of marrying education and technology. So if I had to guess, like that's going to be the industry that I stay in. And if there's like, I think that there's room for growth. And so kind of like, I care more about continuing to like be content in what I'm doing, rather than necessarily like what that looks like, I guess.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have talked to, you hear a lot of people talk about how you can job hop to higher salaries in the data space. And if that's what you're gunning for, I'm not throwing shade to people who want to hop to higher salaries, totally fine. But I really love my job, really love my boss. And, like how I said, I get to do kind of like an interest-based to-do list for my day. I was thinking like it would take a lot for me to leave my job for another one. I would need to know that I would get that same flexibility and freedom. In February, I'm going to Australia and New Zealand for 5 weeks, and it's coming really quickly, and I'm really excited. And I'm going to work while I'm there. Um, but if I were to be at like another job where, even if I were to be a manager, I imagine, but if I were to be at another job where they kind of expected you need to be 9 to 5, I've heard people say that they live on the West Coast, but their team's on the East Coast, so they get up at 5 a.m. to go to work so that they can match their team's hours. My team doesn't work like that at all. So it would take a lot for me to leave my position, because I just love what I'm doing so much, to go to something else. So my focus is more on um, just getting really good and seeing all the different options. The nice thing about Tableau is that there's such a great community out there, and people will post Workout Wednesday and Makeover Monday as this series. Have you heard of it before?
I haven't. I think you might have mentioned it to me recently, but like I haven't looked at it, so I don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah, there's this, I don't remember her name. I think it's done by this woman who posts like she'll post like Makeover Monday will be like a workbook that'll maybe have some issues with it, and she'll say like, okay, make it over. And then Workout Wednesday is, here's a viz that has like kind of a tricky thing in it. Can you figure out how to make this? Sometimes they'll say, but you can't use a table calculation or whatever because they want you to use a level of detail. Um, and you go out and do it, and then afterwards they also will post a blog about it, and oftentimes a video or like a text explanation of how to do it. So for anybody who has taken like a Tableau course and like learned the basics, I always recommend things like that because that's a really great way to upskill. So that's kind of for me right now, like moving forward, that's my focus on upskilling. Like, how many different interesting things can I learn how to do? Like, how can I just go to a workbook that looks beautiful, download it, and figure out how did they do that? How can I draw that onto a dashboard? So that's kind of my goal moving forward. I mean, obviously, everybody likes to get paid more money. I don't know anybody who doesn't. Um, but I love how you said that being content is kind of your biggest focus, because Chris and I were talking about this last time too. A lot of times, like I've talked to other people in other careers and they have to hustle so hard just to pay their bills. And that's how I felt like when I got into data, I think I got like a 4 times salary increase or something because I was working as a nanny part-time through graduate school. And so going from this idea of if I don't work overtime this week, I will not be able to afford anything more than oatmeal and rice and beans to like, oh, I'd rather just live my life and be content is such a huge mindset shift.
Yeah. And I will say, I actually took a small pay cut leaving OT, largely because I was an independent contractor. So like it worked out to roughly the same, but I very much was like in the mindset of, I want to be happy and I want to have this like balance in life. And I don't want to constantly like dread having to wake up in the mornings. And that was kind of where I was heading with what I was doing. And so like, that's kind of like, as long as that's not where I'm at, I'm happy. So, and like, as long as I can survive and I can live my life and I can pay my mortgage, like that was kind of my one big thing when I was like talking to Maven. I was like, I just need to be able to pay my mortgage. Like, that's really it. So like, as long as I can comfortably do that, take care of my dogs, like I want to be content. I want to be happy with what I'm doing. And like, I don't want to let it rule my entire life. So I feel like I'm like, it's a good place to aim for myself. And I agree. Like if other people really want to make bank and change jobs and do all that, like I am all for that for those people. And I just know like my neuroses cannot take that amount of like change. And so I'm going to go for being like happy and content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I just realized it's 7 o'clock. That went super quickly. Do you have any closing thoughts for people that we talked about that you think we should stick into this at the end of the video?
I think some of the biggest things that like I've taken away from our conversation, especially, is like so many people they like never feel like they're going to be ready to apply for jobs, and you kind of just like need to do it and not hold off for forever, because you will continue to hold off. I think that was like one of the big things from the beginning of our conversation that like really is going to stick with me, is like it's always like we all talk about imposter syndrome and never feeling ready, but like it's such a big thing, especially in transitioning. And I feel like a lot of people that are watching this or are probably going to watch this are probably transitioning from other careers. So like that's one big thing that I would just like really make sure that people know, is that like you're never going to feel ready and you kind of have to do it anyway.
Yeah, and it's worth it. It's really scary to make that jump and to be vulnerable. I think that that's really the biggest hurdle that I see is that you don't feel ready, and that's not a problem except for the amount of vulnerability that it takes to not feel ready and go out there and do it anyways. Like I don't know if anyone follows Elise Myers on TikTok, but I love Elise Myers, and she has this like thing that she says, and she says, "Do it scared." Like it's like being brave isn't about not being scared, it's about doing it scared. So we're going to go out there and we're going to do it scared. And I say that to myself a lot, actually.
Well, I've not heard her say that, but like I love that. And it's such a good way to think about things. Like you don't have to be brave, or you don't have to like be ready for it. You just have to do it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming to this. I think it was really nice. I really like the chance to get to chat to other women, in the data field. I have one woman on my team actually, and sometimes the two of us will just chat because it's just nice. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, same. I thank you
Not
so
that I
much
didn't
for.
enjoy Chris is in the chat here. I had a good time with you too, Chris. He's probably in the chat. Like, what about me? But yeah, this has been great. Thanks for giving your time to this. And to everybody, this I think is the most pop in the chat has ever been. Maybe it's because I figured out how to do LinkedIn and YouTube at the same time. I think. I am hoping.
I
Um,
assume.
but yeah, the chat's been popping. So thanks to everybody for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.